Hello, and thank you everyone for attending today's webinar, The Benefits of Using an Integrated Solution for Your Mobile Strategy. My name is Corey Hamlet from 451 Research, and I will be your moderator today. Presenting on today's webinar first will be Chris Marsh, 451 Research Director for Enterprise Mobility. Following Chris will be Emil Stoichev, Product Manager of Progress Digital Factory for Mobile at Progress. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. After the two presentations, we will have a brief Q&A period. To submit a question, just click on the question button within the webinar interface. We will try to get to as many questions as possible, but if we run out of time, someone will get back to you with an answer after the webinar. In addition, a copy of the presentation will be made available to all attendees. We also ask that you provide us with any feedback that you may have from today's presentation. Okay, with that, let's get started. Chris, take it away.
Great, thanks Corey for the introduction, and welcome everybody to the webcast. Really happy to be here this afternoon to share some perspectives on, mobile in the enterprise, mobile apps and mobile app strategies, the kind of things that companies should be looking for and looking to do to become more mature in their mobile application strategies. So I'm going to be doing a couple of things. First of all, talking a bit about the state of play in mobile, where companies are investing, what they're doing, sort of pain points, areas of priority. And then I'll be sort of going through, what are some of the kind of architectural approaches that companies can be thinking about to really go from, I think, where most companies are at the moment, which is kind of very opportunistic phase, to something more strategic and business impactful. So as you can see on this slide, I'm going to be kicking off with that first point, just sharing some statistics from our surveys here in 451. We actually do a lot of survey work amongst businesses where we go out regularly. We've been doing this for quite a number of years. We do it on a quarterly basis, and we ask a bunch of questions to IT and line of business decision makers where they have responsibility for mobile technology decisions. And, we ask them what they're doing, where they're investing, pain points, obstacles, aspirations, and all of this kind of thing. So I'm just going to share some of those statistics to kind of kick off and hopefully give a kind of bigger picture, if you like. So, taken in aggregate, I think, what we've seen over the past couple of years is a positive picture. It's companies investing more. 60% of companies say they're going to be increasing their budget specifically for mobility, mobile projects. A third significantly increasing that budget over the next 12 months. We see a quarter of firms increasing their dedicated mobile headcounts by over 50%. So actually bringing in new human resource, new skills around mobility. 3/4 of companies with B2E apps, so employee mobile apps, already say they're using some kind of analytics to track usage and measure the experience. And on the B2C side, almost 60% saying that, they're using some kind of A/B testing to, hone and finally tune their B2C apps before they are distributed or reiterated and re-released. So, good amount of interest, good amount of activity. We're seeing a gradual sort of upswing, if you like, across these different metrics and others that we gather in the surveys over the past few years. But I guess the question we need to ask is, where is all of this going, and what's the kind of, bigger picture as to how companies should be thinking about mobility? I think for enterprises, the promise really is that mobility should be helping you free the data that's traditionally been locked up in your kind of back-end applications and systems and databases and repositories, getting it out to your mobile users, but really critically enriching that data with the context of the mobile user and through the interaction the mobile user is having with that application, fundamentally to create better applications. So, whether that's driving greater productivity, whether it's creating more engaging experiences for, consumers and customers. The challenge, though, on the supply side technology, I think, is to, help businesses turn that data into a valuable digital inventory, if you like. So it's not just about getting data that's previously been locked up in these kind of pre-mobile legacy back-end infrastructures out to mobile applications. But really, I think the bigger picture going forward is companies understanding how to really continually add value to that data as it flows in and out of applications and across the infrastructure and back to, those back-end resources in a way that continuously adds value to the user going forward. So, in terms of the kind of underlying technology, we need to think about, and I'll go on to talk about some of this in a bit more detail in subsequent slides. But just to kind of presage that, we need to think about how to reduce the latency of data as it passes in and out of apps, how to understand it through analytics, how to recycle it across that infrastructure in, continuously kind of iterated mobile experiences. And all of this really has traditionally been very challenging to do, where companies are having to, patch together lots of potentially kind of siloed third-party technologies. So, one of the things obviously we'll be doing in this presentation is talking to, some of the opportunities around looking at, more integrated technologies as the foundation for a mobile app strategy going forward. So just kind of before we get into some of the, what we should be looking for, I just thought it'd be useful to share a little bit more context in terms of where I think we are and what some of the challenges are, because that helps set the scene in terms of what you should be looking for. So again, sharing a bit more survey data here. This is from the same surveys I referenced on the previous slide, just to kind of explain what you're looking at. The top darker blue line is the total mobile proportion of the overall workforce, if you like. So we define a mobile worker as anyone who spends 20% or more of their time away from their primary workspace on an average week. And, non-mobile workers, obviously anyone who spends less than that. And the lighter blue line is the amount of time that everybody else, i.e. non-mobile workers, spend doing work in mobile environments. And as you can see, with the odd fluctuation here over the sort of quarterly survey results, there isn't actually that much change in either metric here. So, we have, 2/3 of employees who say they use a smartphone for work, almost half of employees who say they do some kind of work on their smartphone on a daily basis, whether that's, their own phone or one provisioned to them by their employer. Yet 60% of employees don't have any mobile apps provided to them, and that includes, basic sort of PIM-style mobile productivity apps. So, by far the majority don't have any sort of apps provided to them, if you like, by their employer. And a quarter of all employees say they are, very concerned about the privacy of their own, content, data, information on devices that they own. So if they are sort of obliged to take on some kind of MDM service on their device, for example, significant levels of concern about employers either intentionally or accidentally wiping information or having access to things that maybe you don't want your employer to see. So, really the point of this slide is that, this massive cascading of devices that we've seen into employees' hands hasn't in any way really translated into direct productivity gains. I think one of the issues here is that mobile development is fundamentally different from what came before. So just highlighting here some challenges that are specific to mobile. I think first of all, it places new pressures on workloads. We actually have some interesting data in our Voice of the Enterprise surveys, which is another actually separate survey we do here in 451 Research, that points to only around 10% of companies doing sort of policy-based automation and orchestration of their application workloads. That's not mobile specific, but I think it does point to the challenge of introducing greater automation, and that's really only made more complicated with mobile, certainly in terms of consumer-facing mobile apps. Really significant pressures on delivering availability and stability against often very unpredictable demand, and the imperative to reduce the latency of data as it passes in and out of apps, and picking up users' context as it goes. So, mobile certainly places new pressures on managing workloads. That's something we obviously have to think about. It also has specific requirements in terms of just getting apps out the door, whether it's new types of certification, whether it's how to manage key stores, whether it's testing on emulators and simulators, potentially actual mobile devices, how you handle app versioning. There's a whole host of things which is definitively different with mobile than sort of web development, I guess, if you like, that sort of preceded it. And then, technologies and methods mediating roles across the software development lifecycle, I think, are also evolving with, particular pressure from the advent of mobility. So, we see things like testing becoming more of a definitive developer concern. We see things like collaboration needing to be much more concurrent across certainly the early stages of the life cycle, and across business and technical stakeholders than this, waterfall sequential approach that's traditionally marked sort of web development. And the very definition of developer in and of itself is expanding to include maybe less pure techie roles, the kind of citizen developer, or however you might want to encapsulate that kind of less technically able, but still, somebody who maybe has skills that can help in the life cycle process. And then, I guess what a lot of this is building to, and a subject of what we'll be addressing in subsequent slides in the presentation, is that the toolkit here can actually be very complex if you make it. It can also be much more straightforward if you make it. It depends on what you're trying to do. But certainly we still see quite a fragmented landscape of technologies. And again, to one of my earlier points, difficult, I think, for enterprises when they're having to patch a lot of these technologies together using potentially multiple SDKs, integrating services into the same application, etc. So, certainly challenges. I guess in the real world, what this boils down to is, kind of what we're showing on this slide. And this was taken from a custom survey that we did for a 451 client, where we asked actually IT developers, IT managers, and different lines of business personnel, questions around how they were developing their apps, how they're doing the front end, the back end, the integration, how they were deploying them. Really interesting set of results. And this was maybe some of the most interesting data points coming from the question, which essentially was, how much of your total sort of typical mobile app budget for a mobile app project do you spend on different tasks across the pre and post production lifecycle? And as you can see here, that biggest sort of blue cog on the bottom right, approaching half of all a typical mobile app project budget spent on the initial pre-production development. Now, that's kind of crazy, really. Maybe not in the context of a singular app, but of course, companies are looking at a broader set of use cases and, portfolios of apps. I think ultimately we'll see, tens, potentially hundreds, if not more, of mobile applications available to employees as we go forward and mobile technologies become, more widely adopted. So spending almost half of your budget up front just getting apps out the door is obviously not sustainable in that context. I think much more time needs to be spent on, getting a sort of minimum viable product out the door that, you will have tested to have been, suitable for release in terms of your users' expectations, but something that you can then integrate feedback in terms of usage and problems in performance potentially to then iterate the experience going forward. So really, this needs to kind of flip the other way, and this is the result of the mismatch that we've seen in a lot of technologies, and between those technologies and lifecycle workflows and the requirement to be very agile when it comes to mobile. So, challenges for sure. Positive news, though, I think, in that we are seeing, interesting sort of changes that we're beginning to see sort of come through nuanced in our survey results in terms of where companies are investing and where they're prioritizing their investment in mobile projects. So we've asked this question for actually a lot of years. So we have some interesting longitudinal data on it. Essentially, which out of the following is most important for you to mobilize over the next 2 years? Is it field and sales force? Is it customer facing activities, or is it kind of general internal business process? a year, sort of a year and a half ago, if I'd showed you this, you would see field and Salesforce at the top, and then customer facing, either marketing or service, and then general internal business process. Q3 last year, so 12 months ago, was the first wave of data we'd seen over the years we've been asking this question, where the general internal business process had risen to the top. So this isn't a quirk of sample size or in the survey data. This is actually held throughout this year as well. So really testament, I think, to companies broadening out their focus, looking beyond traditional low-hanging fruit, looking to address in a more strategic sense a wider subset of workers, and looking for business value impact from their mobile investments in a broader way than we've traditionally seen so far. So, good news, I think. I think it's an interesting testament to sort of gradual growing maturity of this landscape. When we do research, both qual and quant, amongst enterprises, looking at who maybe is more mature, who are the early adopters here, we see an interesting set of perspectives around really what mobile means. And I think this is an important set of points to make before I go on to talk about what some of the technologies are that align with this kind of new way of thinking about mobility. So on the slide that you can see here, the sort of left hand lighter grey boxes is really kind of how we've traditionally thought about enterprise mobility. And then the black boxes are those that we see, characteristic amongst early adopters and companies who are really getting their mobile strategy right. So just to kind of briefly talk through this, we've traditionally defined enterprise mobility as really the mobility of users, right? So devices in pockets, tablets in bags, that kind of thing. It's also really, I think, too much been thought about as just another channel, and also as from a sort of focus point of view pertaining to devices at the edge, and then the concept is this linear stack of existing sort of pre-mobile technologies, and mobile's just the kind of thing we bolt on the edge, and that's how we think about it. So I think this is still in a lot of ways the predominant prevailing view. I think although what we're seeing is a slightly different view on this taken by those who are doing really interesting mobile programs, which is thinking as a starting point of mobility as the agility of the enterprise, right? So rather than just thinking about devices in your employees' pockets or your customers' pockets and how to get stuff out to them, really I think we should be starting from the point of view of how do we make these available technologies allow us as the enterprise to be much more agile and mobile in terms of how we respond to our users' requirements. I think part of that from an architecture point of view is looking at how these available technologies can be used to reimagine business processes. So it's not just mobile as another channel, although omni-channel is very important to achieve. But I think early adopters are really thinking about how mobile can be used to reimagine business processes in a way where data becomes the center of the business processes, and that data is enhanced by the context of mobile users. So from whether it's product design, product development, across supply chain, data becomes the heart of really decisions you need to make, rather than thinking about a new set of devices and endpoints on the edge. And ultimately, I think as much as we talk about consumerization, the need to deliver consumer grade sort of user experiences, completely don't doubt that as a requirement. But really, I think the starting point for the enterprise should be how do you create a user experience that's palatable to your users, but that can really give you the data and the context to, enhance the value of your data and how you use that value to add additional value in terms of how you're selling your products and services to users. So, if that's the kind of, more appropriate way to think about mobility, what are the kind of technologies and approaches should we look out for to align with that view? So really, this is a kind of progression, if you like, from 1 to 4 of how we see supporting technologies evolve to help companies think about application development. So and obviously this is a bit of a generalization, but I think the sort of comparative stage is is telling us something interesting. So the first kind of stage, very monolithic applications. This isn't news, obviously, to anyone. Typically defined by very tight proprietary technology stack, heavyweight integration, reliance on custom code, custom programming. Then we sort of moved into the sort of more SOA-based approaches where we began to see a sort of uncoupling of the stack, but really, essentially with those frameworks, what we still had was the reliance on very sort of heavy integration methods and still really custom coding. If you kind of fast forward to maybe 6, 7, 8 years ago, we saw the first generation MeAPs, mobile enterprise application platforms, or MADPs that they became known as, that introduced sort of lighter weight ways to think about integration using things like REST and SOAP for mobile, introduced sort of the concepts of for mobile of rapid application development, Visual Studios, that kind of thing. But really, unfortunately, I think replicated what had come before in terms of a tight stack, but on newer mobile proprietary technologies. So really, that model didn't help enterprises scale how they thought about their mobile app strategies. And then we sort of have the phase where I think we're sort of entering now, which is a much more modern mobile approaches where we have, looser stack, lighter weight integration methods, and much more realistic sort of object-driven rapid application development, which gives companies, more flexibility than they've traditionally had when it comes to thinking about the value they're going to get from their investments. So, one of the interesting things we're seeing with these more modern mobile platforms is that it gives companies more realistic prospects of standardizing on a platform foundation for, if not all their projects, then certainly for more than the pockets of apps that we've traditionally seen mobile app dev tooling used for. And this is some interesting statistics, I think, to back that up. So we did a custom survey amongst enterprise, so actual enterprise users and investors in and deployers of mobile application platform technologies. We asked them, how many apps had used the platform to develop and deploy to their users, what kind of ROI they were getting from the investment in that platform, and the really interesting but perhaps commonsensical correlation was between the amount of apps and the perceived ROI. So only a third of enterprises deploying 5 or fewer applications with their platform, regardless of whatever that application use case was, say they achieved a very high ROI. For enterprises deploying more than 20 applications, that ROI shot up to 64%, so more than doubled. I think a testament to companies looking at some of these more modern mobile platform approaches as a way to think about not just apps here and there to address specific use cases, but how to use it as a sort of common architecture to think about mobile apps much more widely across broader subsets of mobile workers and across their business units. So just before I sort of hand over to Emil to talk about some of these issues from a kind of progress perspective, just thought I'd wrap up with some thoughts on, what are the kind of new imperatives for an enterprise mobile app strategy. So I would say, consider a platform partner that can support agile workflows. It's not going to be applicable to everyone. It really does depend on what you're trying to achieve with mobility and what your use cases are, what the business drivers are behind that. But I think certainly we're at a stage where some of these available technologies make it more realistic to think about, using a platform approach rather than, cobbling together lots of sort of disparate technologies. I would also, though, make sure that you, in the selection of whichever technologies you're using, prioritize those that make available sort of open technologies with more sort of interoperable architectures than we had seen in those early generation mobile app platform approaches. And begin to think about this concept of data as digital inventory. What might that mean for your firm? How do you take context from your mobile users and use that to add value to the data that can then be used to enhance that experience for them? and obviously part of that is understanding where you have gaps in data and where you have gaps in APIs to enable that. And then sort of lastly, very difficult to do, but I think sometimes companies sort of over-egg what you need to do here. I think you need to measure the business value return on your investments in tooling. That's going to be challenging. ROI is always a difficult thing to try and peg down. But we've seen just even basic metrics put around, hours used to do certain lifecycle tasks, with different types of tooling, and then all of the usage metrics, your ability to get, however many apps out the door compared to how it was previously. So, even guidelines around the return you're getting from your investment is better than not doing anything and just, assuming that you are or you aren't getting value. So hopefully that's like a bit of food for thought in terms of kind of where we are with mobile at the moment, how we're sort of seeing some of the platform technology approaches evolve over time, and the kind of things you can bear in mind when thinking about evaluating platform technologies going forward. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Emil.
Thanks, Chris. So I want to quickly reiterate over the problems that we see today on the market. So just my slides. Yeah, so here we should be. So what IT faces today is really increasing pressure to deliver a wide variety of mobile applications quickly and cost effectively. These apps can be both external facing consumer applications that target to increase the customer engagement, or internal applications to enable and empower employees and partners. ITs are really being challenged to adapt to this highly mobile work style, make fast and effective business decisions, and deliver secure IT solutions in agile manner. So anyone who has faced the urgency to create a comprehensive mobile solution today has also faced the challenges and the limitations that are related to it. The variety of stakeholders who need to interact and work with the applications, be that marketers, ITs, developers, sales, and so on, they really push the requirements for more comprehensive enterprise-grade technology to cover the entire organization's needs. The reality of the mobile application development today in a complex enterprise environment is that it really requires a diverse portfolio of front-end and back-end tools and services. You need to choose an enterprise mobility solution that addresses the requirements of the many roles in the company who interact with the application. So let's say that you pick up a solution that handles only the connectivity problems that you face today. Maybe that involves some exposing of data from on-premises databases, consume it from a mobile app that enable employees to work while on the go. Tomorrow, what you need probably is to integrate this application with your identity provider, leverage some existing users and permissions. Of course, that may not be part of the point solution. Then you need to distribute this application only within the employees of a given department and assign roles and so on. That, again, will not be part of the point solution, and you need to deal with another vendor. So going with a point solution can go as far as affecting your entire organization's potential for growth. So it's really necessary to invest in a solution that offers this flexibility, functionality, and supports the entire enterprise in the long run. Of course, that said, you should be diligent in prioritizing the capabilities that are specific to your business needs and objectives. What we offer as part of Digital Factory today is a complete mobile application development platform with a portfolio of solutions that address the entire mobile application development lifecycle. We enable the organization to go from designing and developing through deploying and analyzing the mobile application. We enable you to really address a diverse set of use cases. You can build native apps with Angular 2, using our open source NativeScript framework, you can extend iOS and Android apps, existing Android and iOS apps, or also build some hybrid apps with Cordova. To build these apps, there is a set of critical capabilities that you should look for if you want to be really efficient and cover all your mobile needs. The first is the Visual App Builder. To get started really quickly and deliver a proof of concept or a minimum viable product as Chris mentioned, you can leverage some kind of a visual development approach. You can use pre-designed screen templates, connect screens to live data, and generate a fully functioning mobile application. This will definitely lower your learning curve, save time to build the proof of concept, and enable you to get started very quickly. Next, you really need to think about the developers and the environment that they will work in to build those mobile applications. You can ask yourself a few questions like, how productive can I be with this vendor? How can I use my own IDE, my own development environment? Or am I locked to use their own tool? Do they have a plugin to enable productivity within my own development environment? So if you use Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code or Eclipse or whatever you use, you need to make sure that the vendor really supports your environment. So you are the customer, you know your IDE, make sure that the vendor enables you to be effective within your environment. Then you should make sure that the platform supports UI with native look and feel. You need to be able to build beautiful, accessible platform native UI. You need to integrate with the device hardware and APIs and really have a good application performance. With NativeScript, you can define the UI once and let it adapt to run everywhere or tailor the UI to specific devices and screens. And one of the most important capabilities is the support for backend services. No matter what connectivity challenges you face today, be sure that the use cases will grow both in diversity and complexity. So on-premises and hybrid connectivity to existing systems of record. Things like your ERP systems or some cloud systems like SAP, Oracle, Salesforce, you name it. You probably want your applications to connect to those systems. So think about all the connectivity use cases that you might have. That could be an ERP system like cloud system, or that could also be some relational database or some non-relational database. Every enterprise has a set of data sources that will need to be made available to the mobile application. So think about those use cases, those data sources, and make sure that the vendor supports connecting your mobile applications to those data sources. Also, the chances that you have some APIs, already existing APIs that you want to reuse from the mobile application. Maybe you currently have a web application or some desktop application or just some system that exposes an API that you want this to be accessible also from the mobile application. Think about the offline scenarios, how you handle offline synchronization, conflict resolution, and so on. Then another key point, especially for internal applications, is the enterprise security. Look for integration with existing identity providers so you can leverage the user accounts and roles and provide single sign-on, basically secure your applications. You also need to think about how you secure data while in transit or at rest and learn how the vendor complies to industry security standards. They are really dependent on the industry you are operating. So depending on your case, you have very different requirements, but standards like SOC 2 or HIPAA are one of the most used ones. And then think about also multi-channel applications. I want to cover two capabilities actually here: the content management and the customer engagement. So think about those multi-channel apps in advance. How will you engage the audience on any channel and any device? How will you manage this content? How will you share it between web and mobile? How will you target the same audience using a single messaging system? Think about push notifications, in-app messages, web messages, and so on. Just some messages that are event triggered or manually triggered. How do you engage with the audience regardless of the channel? Today with Digital Factory, we can manage the content as part of our content management system and deliver it both on the web and on the mobile device. And finally, think about the developer operations. So how will you distribute the application within your organization or to the public app stores? How will you distribute it for beta testing? How will you capture the application usage? How will you monitor the application performance? How will you analyze crash reports? Also, how will you gather some user feedback? Another thing that I think Chris mentioned couple of minutes ago is about managing the application versions, managing provisioning profiles, certificates, and so on. All these fall into this category and should be thought about in advance. Another interesting thing is how you distribute some small changes to the applications once they're already published to the app stores. So think of some maybe some content updates or stuff like that. It's really unreasonable to wait for the whole app approval process. So pushing content updates to existing mobile applications without going to the App Store resubmission process is also something that you should consider. There are solutions that make this process much easier, and they just don't go to the whole app approval process. So you can immediately push such content updates to your web users. And this is on the capability side. So the vendor should really provide tools and services that handle the whole development lifecycle. To take that even further and to be even more efficient, you can also think about how you can reuse existing SKUs and at the same time build the applications on all major platforms. With Digital Factory, today we support capabilities beyond just building smartphone and tablet apps, but also expand to desktop, web, wearables, IoT devices, and so on. From technical perspective, we bet entirely on Angular to enable such scenarios. Just recently, with the release of Angular 2, the write once, run everywhere is no longer a myth. And when you combine Angular 2 with native script, you really get a very complete story that allows you to share code that runs natively on the target platforms, be that web, mobile web, or native mobile. So this way you can reuse code and SKUs to build applications for each of those deployment targets. Along with it, you get the native performance and speed on web, iOS, Android, and soon on Windows from a single Angular 2 project. Native script will really provide you with an all-inclusive toolkit to build mobile applications with the Angular framework. All combined with the probably best possible developer experience. It's really simple to build mobile applications, just as building a web application, but with all the performance you would expect from native. And with that as a conclusion, to really have a full control, predictability, and be successful with your investments in a mobile application development platform, you really need to take a holistic approach and consider all the mobile initiatives. We see that investments in mobility continue to grow significantly in terms of initiatives, budgets, headcount, and so on. The internal business process optimizations remains the most important thing to mobilize today. Think about and prioritize the capabilities that are really specific to your circumstance and business objectives. Quick and cost-effective delivery won't work with point solutions. So make sure that you invest in platforms that have everything for your team, including marketers, developers, IT, sales, and so on. And then think about the long term. So create a very comprehensive mobile strategy for the next 6, 12, 24 months ahead, and think about the technical resources you have and the channels that you want to serve. So mobile web and desktop, these are basically the channels that you really need to target when building applications. And to help you in the process, to help you navigate through all the things you need to consider as part of your mobile strategy, we have prepared a guide that you can download today on the address shown on this slide. So with that, I pass it over to Corey and kick off the Q&A session.
All right, thank you, Chris and Emil. It's now time to move on to our Q&A session. If you have a question, just click on the question button to submit it. So it looks like we have a question coming in. Our first question is, I think it's for Chris. What questions should I ask when I choose a vendor to execute on my mobile strategy?
Yeah, good question. I mean, that obviously, I guess, depends on what you are looking to do, specifically. But I think there's probably a number of broad-based concerns across, whatever companies are looking to do, which are relevant here in terms of what you should be asking potential technology partners. I mean, I think first of all, if we're talking about platforms as a kind of foundation for a kind of app strategy, then most companies are going to want to have certain assurances around the scalability of that investment that they'll be making, and that can include things like ensuring that the underlying technologies are sort of open technologies where there's existing skills within the organization to apply to using the platform. And this can often be quite nuanced. There are providers out there who sort of proclaim open technologies, but in certain aspects there are proprietary scripting languages or protocols that are kind of worked in there that need to be understood, and that place a certain burden in terms of developers learning those to actually create their apps sort of end to end. So open technologies is obviously a big one, and then increasingly we're seeing focus on reusability in terms of application templates, application components, functions, and again, if there aren't those, it's going to place a higher burden on your developers in terms of the value they can, in terms of the kind of learning curve and then the value they can get from it. I guess to put this all another way, how much can you reuse existing skills that you have in your organization to use new technologies you're bringing in? And then another couple of things that we've seen important when speaking to enterprises around these kind of areas. What do companies mean when they mean offline? Because there's sort of true offline, and then there's sort of partial offline, if you like, and that could be the topic for a whole another discussion. But this doesn't just pertain to sort of dedicatedly mobile, road warriors, etc. I think even for knowledge workers, connectivity these days isn't quite as ubiquitous as we might like to think it is. So, how will the technology vendor sort of provide offline capabilities for your apps? And then thirdly, I'll just say transparency in pricing. I think this is something that the market is still working through in terms of, giving enterprises real transparency in terms of what they'll be paying for, the technology itself. But then, if an app is scaling up and down, often fairly unpredictable manner, what that means in terms of what you'll be paying for the technology supporting that. So, transparency around cost and pricing, I think, is a really important one. Probably lots of other issues as well, again, dependent on particular enterprise context, but I think they're probably some of the bigger ones that we come across.
Thanks, Chris. Second question here, looks like it can go to both speakers. I have already existing mobile apps. How can I leverage the investments my organization has already made?
I can take that one. Well, if you have already existing applications like iOS or Android application, then currently there are plenty of cross-platform native mobile application platforms that can be leveraged to continue the development using those tools and just target both platforms. So with native script, what we will allow you to do is just to take an existing iOS or Android application and start the development from there. You can start extending this application with new functionality, just adding new features and so on. And this application will be able to target both iOS and Android. So really leveraging your existing investments on native applications and continuing with a cross-platform native framework, you'll be able to speed up the development and just leverage some skills like some web skills that you can use to continue the development targeting both platforms.
Yeah, and just I guess to add on top of that, I guess on the back end, if you've already got mobile apps deployed, there may well be potential reuse or leveraging of existing identity providers and ways that you've connected your existing mobile apps into your backend infrastructure, connectors and APIs, potentially gateway technologies through which you're providing backend access to resources to those apps. So there would most likely be some kind of infrastructure as well that can obviously be reused for newer applications.
All right, thank you. Another question we have is, why should I care about multi-channel apps?
I can have a go at that. I guess the simple answer to that is we don't live in a single device world. We actually do some survey work, which I didn't share in this presentation, but amongst employees, so not the decision makers, but employees, and we ask them what they do on mobile, different types of sort of day-to-day work tasks and what they do on their laptops or desktops, depending on what other devices they have. And there's still a requirement to support multiple device, form factors. We still see with mobile, I think it holds primacy when it comes to browsing and basic PIM-related stuff, and where there are specific mobile apps deployed against, specific business processes and workflows. Maybe they take preference, but obviously for sort of hardcore productivity, things like, word processing, we still see laptops and desktops as being the preferred devices there. So that's as relevant from a productivity point of view as it is for a customer consumer points of view as well. So we're seeing in some ways the interesting thing is that mobile is being is being used in interesting ways to rethink some of those tasks that previously users wouldn't want to have done on mobile. But I still think it's going to be a while if it is ever going to be the case, I think it's probably not going to be ever going to be the case that we are still in a multi-device world, and hence there is always going to be a imperative for companies to support multi-channel apps.
Right,
yeah, and to add to that, you want to be where your users are. So if your users want to work on the mobile, be on the mobile. If they're on the web, be on the web. But you really need to provide efficiency for the whole organization, no matter where they are. And you really need to provide this consistent experience across all channels which your users use.
Thanks, Emil. Last question we have, looks like this one is for Emil. How is NativeScript different than Cordova, PhoneGap, or Xamarin?
Well, first for Cordova and PhoneGap, this is really about the being on native. I mean, Cordova and PhoneGap really produce hybrid applications. While with NativeScript, you really produce a real native application that can access the device API, that can leverage the native UI of the platform. And while comparing to Xamarin, then you really need to think about the skills your developers have. So because we go after the Angular community with NativeScript, we really want to leverage the web skills of your team. So if you're coming from the web world, if you have web skills, or you come from the Java world, or you come from the Microsoft world, if you have those JavaScript, HTML5 mindset, then NativeScript would be the right choice for you because it will allow you to leverage your existing skills. On the other hand, there are multiple technological differences between NativeScript and Xamarin that NativeScript will be much better for one part of your development lifecycle. Xamarin would be better for a different part. Think about the design time experience. So how easy will be to during the development and designing of your application, how easy will be to preview the changes, how easy will be to ship updates to your applications after the applications are live. So for example, with NativeScript, you'll be able to push live changes without going to the app resubmission, while with Xamarin you won't be able to do that. Think what's your current development environment, whether you develop on Windows or on Mac. With NativeScript, it might be a bit easier to build iOS applications, even if you don't own a Mac, because we offer those cloud builds. And yeah, there are many more technical questions, but I think from a higher level, this is why you would use one or the other approach.
Thank you, Emil. Looks like that's all the time we have today for questions. On behalf of today's presenters, I'd like to thank you for attending today's webinar, and we hope to see you on another webinar soon. Thank you and have a great day.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.